All right, YouTube, there's a racially motivated new political party that's making significant grounds in a somewhat major economy in the world. I'll let you take a wild guess what country it's in. Could it be those horrible racists somewhere in Europe? No. Australians? The United States? Canada? Some other white enclave? No, it's South Africa with the economic freedom fighters run by Julius Malema, promising to nationalize the banks, which is like, oh, well, might alienate yourself to the international community, but I guess if you think that's the proper thing to do, you run a risk with it, but okay. The other thing he's promising to do in a swipe at the ANC, which is, far out there enough and practically a socialist party in South Africa, which is why their economy is slowly sliding into irrelevance. No thanks to BRICS, by the way. Putin sees them as a giant mineral deposit and not much else. Also promising to confiscate a bunch of white farmers' property and give it to black people. The idea is that whites have too much of the farmland, so they need to redistribute it without compensation either. Now, I would say this is kind of communistic or, nationalistic. Oh, evil nationalist Nazis. But of course, that term is never used in the context of Africa unless it's black nationalism, in which case it's okay because you got like reggae music or something going on and a Bob Marley t-shirt. I find this very funny because I believe that some other African leader not that long ago, what was his name? Oh, Robert Mugabe. He confiscated farmland from white farmers too, gave it to black individuals. It didn't work out so well, though. Within a couple of years, they were begging for billions in food aid to prevent mass famine. That's specifically because they gave it to people who didn't know how to farm. Now, if I take a piece of farmland here in Vermont owned by some random white farmer, give it to some UVM student from Burlington, some other white person who doesn't know anything about farming, that farm will fail. If I give it to a black person who doesn't know anything about farming, it will fail. The problem is there aren't that many black farmers in South Africa. Most of the farmers are still white. Now, over here, what do we see farmers as? We see them as dependent on subsidies because farming just doesn't bring in a great deal of income. We sort of prop up the very industry, unless it's some giant factory farm with, like a gigantic-ass industrial cotton field or something making, textiles or some biofuel or something. We see it as reliant upon subsidies. It's not exactly the most easy form of work. It's either back-breaking labor if you're using lower levels of technology, or if it's like an all-organic farm or something, it's generally less mechanized. Or you have to consistently buy year after year on loan from a bank seeds. You have to keep your tractors running. You have to keep your harvesters running. You have to keep everything else running. Now, the white farmers of South Africa have already now for a number of years been viciously opposed by certain black nationalist groups there that have gone after them and literally like slaughtered whole families of them as a form of amusement, essentially. They see them as racist. They're like, kill the Boer and so forth. That's sort of what happens in South Africa, and the government there has turned a blind eye to it for some time. In fact, the international community has as well. But let's consider what will happen if several tens of thousands of white farmers are suddenly told, oh, we're taking 75–80% of your land because you don't deserve it, parceling it up by some black farmers. What are you going to do? Technically, you have a right of return to Europe, or you can always fight back against the government, say this is unreasonable, so we're going to form our own enclave. There are white security forces in South Africa that do still hold some level of sway. It would be a savage guerrilla campaign by a bunch of white individuals being persecuted to the brink of extinction. It'd be very funny because the Western media probably won't report on this. They care if an American politician or a European politician says, I think we should have more border control. I think perhaps we have a few too many economic migrants to sustain this for much longer. They're called like a Nazi, a total racist bigot. But you get a politician, a mainstream politician, new party, but made great gains over the course of just one election cycle, openly calling for confiscating white people's land, saying, oh, we're not chasing, this is a quote, we are not chasing the whites away, we're simply saying you have too much land. We want you here in South Africa, but 80% of the land belongs to us, Malema told the crowd. the problem here is that's redistributionism. That's going to piss people off. Number two, it's not with compensation. It's not like you're even paying them like pennies on the dollar for their land. So why would they stay at fucking all? They'll just sell off what they have left to somebody if they can possibly accomplish it, and then they'll fucking leave. You know, they'll go to Namibia or Kenya or some place that actually will value the fact that they know how to do something to expand the economy elsewhere. Again, Robert Mugabe already tried this. It didn't work. It collapsed his nation's agricultural economy. You know, you've got an area that's actually decent for farming. You take the farmers and kick them off of their land and redistribute that land in a communal fashion, let's face it, to a bunch of out-of-work urbanites that don't know how to so much as plant a sunflower seed, you're going to have some economic problems. Unfortunately, he's saying the land belongs to us. Well, what he means is black South Africans. Well, that's all well and good, but can you actually farm that land? That's like taking a textile mill, giving it to somebody who doesn't know anything about textiles, you know, somebody who knows literally nothing about it. Well, it will fail. That's like taking any business or piece of land that's being used for something, giving it to someone who doesn't know how to use it. Now, over here we say, well, if you give a gun to someone who doesn't know anything about guns and you're not willing to at least train them, well, you're fucked. They're going to shoot themselves or somebody else, and so it's a big issue. But this happens and nobody wants to talk about it. I mean, what if these farmers fight back? You know, they've got like shotguns and stuff like that. What if they just leave and say, well, to hell with this, and they just mass migrate somewhere else? How are you going to farm the land then? You don't have enough people to actually farm it. There's plenty of brute labor to actually work the land, but unless they're being led by somebody who knows anything about agriculture at all, you're kind of screwed. Now, there may be a few black farmers in South Africa. Yes, I'm sure there are, but are they going to be able to manage all of that land themselves? The short answer is no. I don't think it's going to work that way. Mugabe learned that the hard way and then had to beg for handouts from the international community, food and money, essentially. So, yeah, I mean, this is obviously racially motivated. It's openly stated that it is, as opposed to what you see in the West, which is it's front page news in every Western new media source, magazine, everything, blog, fucking Twitter feed, YouTube channel. Everybody talks about it to no end. If someone here suggests that a single minority individual did anything wrong, that a single illegal immigrant should be deported, that a single chain link fence should be put on the border, that you should reject even like 1% of current economic migrant levels, that maybe you need to take a few less refugees or have a better screening process, anything that you can possibly say is some sort of Nazi-esque bigotry here. And yet you have a political party, a mainstream political party, talking about confiscating most of people's land on a racial basis. And even though it's a white minority, in a white minority continent that's like 99% black people or like North Africans or Berber and Arabic individuals, you got a continent that's where whites are not vastly overrepresented in politics, wherever you've got a democratic system, which South Africa claims to be apparently, and yet you've got this going on. It's laughable. And I mean, you have to look it up on fucking Al Jazeera to even find an article. I'm not seeing anything on like CNN. They're not saying, oh, white people in South Africa endangered because crazy communist government wants to confiscate their land and like make them serfs or something. It just doesn't make any sense. It's not how you run an economy. It wouldn't be taught if this were a white nation doing it. It would already be front page news everywhere, and everyone would already be planning an invasion force. It happens in South Africa, and everyone pretends that nothing's going on. By the way, how's Putin going to react to this? How are the Chinese that bankroll so many firms there going to react to this? They're all in BRICS together. Again, this is a totally different issue from race. I've warned now for some time, BRICS is untenable specifically because of the nations involved. Brazil just basically is forcing out its socialist government. They'll be Western capitalists very soon. They'll begin to improve. They'll no longer need BRICS. They'll invest in themselves, be part of the worldwide community of trade. They'll have no problem. They'll very quickly become a powerful nation in Latin America, more powerful than they are already. And land area-wise, they're one of the largest nations on Earth. They got one of the highest proportions of arable land, and yet they're held back by this socialist nonsense. South Africa, now you see what's happening. India's in open negotiations, essentially, with the Western world because they hate the Chinese. China's in a recession. Russia's in a recession. Most of their plans are failing. Well, how much worse could it possibly be? Then you've got, like, Russia's sphered states. You got, like, Venezuela and Iran suffering because of oil prices. They couldn't possibly be weaker as a collective. So, you know, North Korea, yeah, there's a stable country. Another famine yet again, like the third time in the last decade. I'm sure that they can survive indefinitely, even while the Chinese slowly lose interest in propping them up with grain shipments. No, South Africa's screwed if they vote in these morons. Unfortunately, what you see is that countries like this, where this sort of stuff is common, often do vote in a bunch of idiots. Nelson Mandela was an idiot too, and they voted him in. Supposedly he was this great, upstanding Nobel Peace Prize sort of Abe Lincoln of Africa, and yet he was anything but. He was essentially letting his followers constantly harass, beat, and bomb things and burn people alive. Winnie Mandela loved it too. They probably watched it as a form of celebratory act. But we still have this weird fucking Western fixation during the Reagan era with Free Nelson Mandela and how long he was in prison and shit. It just makes no sense. Look at South Africa now. You could have ended apartheid without all this shit going on. But, yeah, some shit's going down in South Africa, and the Western media would rather bury its head in the sand. But then again, it's a non-white nation, and it's not in Eastern Asia. You know, it's not a Westernized country fully. It's more, you know, it's more aligned with, like, BRICS and third world sort of mentality, so they can do no wrong. It's very strange. Apparently, to these people, the only acceptable form of nationalism is black nationalism. And if you wear a Bob Marley shirt and talk about Malcolm X, nationalism's okay. Any other time, it makes you a despicable Nazi. They're even going after, like, East Europeans now. I mean, Eastern Asians right now, like the Japanese. Oh, too much Nazi imagery in your anime or whatever. It's very funny to see. That's about all. Peace out.